Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Geer, here with you as well. And we're going to continue our little journey through the Old Testament chronology and timeline.
Number 6.
Is this episode number 6? Yeah, I lost track. There's just a lot of very interesting information. We are doing really a thumbnail rather than an exhaustive overview here. You can't go into all the details on the show. It really would be too much. But for those who have a bent of such things, it's fascinating, all the little intricacies and checks and counter-checks that the Bible has of itself. And we went through several of those already.
And now we're getting into the kings, and the kings are rather complicated because you have to take clues from various places in the Bible to actually string together the timeline and there is a continuous timeline from Adam to Jesus. And you have the genealogies of Matthew and Luke, right?
There's Matthew and Luke. You also have things in the book of Acts. You don't need, believe it or not, any of those things to do the chronology from the Old Testament to Jesus. You don't need any of those. They do help, but sometimes they actually cause issues trying to figure out. I'll give you an example. When we did the last time, we did the Judges, Doug, right? And what you're trying to figure out, there's no numbers given with Samuel. There's no numbers given for King Saul in the Old Testament. Okay? We know from the New Testament, Saul reigned 40 years. But the chronology in the Old Testament works out just fine the way it is, but you have issues when you and part of it has to do with extrapolation. For instance, Samuel, his kids were not very much better than Eli's kids. Eli was a judge before Samuel. Okay? So they wanted to have a king, right? Because they said, well, you're old. Okay? What happens is you tend to stretch out timelines and think, well, how is he old if Saul, when you look at some of the way Saul reigned 40 years, part of his reigning would be in the middle of Samuel's judgeship.
Right.
And that's what happens. And one of the things it tells you and helps us out, we talked about this last time, was the fact that the Ark of the Covenant was captive in Abinadab's house for 20 years. And the one who took it out of Abinadab's house was David, after he'd already ruled 7 years. So you have Eli. He dies, the ark is taken captive. For 7 months, it's in there. Then it comes back, and 20 years it's in Israel, or in Abinadab's house. And then, so Saul basically must have been reigning for 27 years before the Ark of the Covenant was, before the Ark of the Covenant was captured. Because in 13 more years, he was still reigning, and then, he was done, and then David comes in 7 years. I don't want to get too much to labor, but it was a lot of trick trying to figure this out for me. I'm going, that compresses it a lot. And I go, how? Then you got to ask questions like, how old was Samuel? How was old as old at that time? Mm-hmm. And they don't really give you that answer. We know that probably the high priesthood of Eli started when he was 30. I would assume probably Samuel the same thing. As far as he started doing things, he was known as a prophet, a seer, they used to call him in those days. That's not really so critical for all of it's fascinating stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of interesting intricacies in the Old Testament timelines. When you get to the king list, you have the United Monarchy. So what happens? You've got 40 years of Saul, 40 years of David, 40 years of Solomon. But remember, some of the number of the count is the 480 years of the judges, which really started with Moses. Mm-hmm. It ends with Samuel to some extent, but really it ends with Saul's reigning. But the numbers don't stop there. They stop really after the end with Eli and the Ark of the Covenant. So that's where we get our number count, our little small numbers. Mm-hmm. But what we've talked about over the last several sessions, Doug, is the long numbers are the constraining influence, if you will. In other words, the 480 years of the judges to the fourth year, that goes to the fourth year King Solomon. That's a biblical number. That's a long number. In the book of Genesis, we talked, it's not so hard because every number was long, in a sense,
right, yeah,
okay?
Exactly, yeah.
But we talked about the fact that what happens is you go from individuals, and then you go to a family, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Joseph. Then it goes to the nation, Moses, then you go, and then continues on to the judges. Now you're coming back into a monarchy, but until David comes in, you're not really dealing with the chronology. You're not lining up an individual with the chronology yet like you were back in Genesis. Mm-hmm. But now you're coming back because the nation and the individual are kind of together now. under David. And that's what you really got to get into that. So
we should also explain why this is important.
Okay.
Because what we are trying to show is that the Bible is internally consistent with itself.
It is.
In terms of talking about real dates and real numbers.
Right.
Because, we also are dealing with a short period of time in terms of this whole genealogy, tracing Jesus all the way back to the first man, which is Adam. And we're with the revolution against evolution. We're dealing with the Bible is showing us that our genealogy shows that the Earth is relatively young in comparison with evolution, which would say that this.
It's interesting, though, you say that because in evolutionary time, deep time, you're dealing with mega millions of years. You're dealing with millions. You're talking about hundreds of thousands to millions to even billions of years. Where you're dealing with a biblical chronology, you're dealing with a very short time frame, relatively speaking. Only about we're talking about from now to the creation, less than or a little over 6,000 years, maybe a little less. And the arguments you're going to get in with these situations are they get very intense, but we're not dealing with the numbers of years. When you deal with creation and evolution, you're not even close. When you're dealing with what we're talking about, you might be off from anywhere from, even if you use the Septuagint, you're off maybe 1,000 years, okay, to about maybe 80 years to the standard chronologies. So you're not dealing with mega, but those little years are critical because the Bible thinks it is. And it tells you can link the first Adam to the last Adam. And it gives you, and it's interesting because Luke's genealogy, I always tell people this, Doug, I says, where did Luke's genealogy go from real people to fake people? Because it goes all the way from Jesus to Adam. But Luke's genealogy, like Matthew's, doesn't give you numbers.
And
that's critical.
Why does the evolutionists want to mythologize this? The theistic evolutionists, they want to make Adam and Eve just a fable or a myth. Why do they want to
they want to leave, well, that we've talked about that for many times, but for the audience, because they want to allow for deep time to happen. I find some of these people have some incredible theories of which the Bible knows nothing of. Like there's this global cataclysm before the fall that's even greater than the fall. The Noah's flood. I mean, there's destruction, and there's these pre-Adamic civilizations. I used to love that. Jesse Penn Lewis talked about Earth's earliest ages. That's where demons come from, and all this kind of stuff. And it's all Christian science fiction, as far as you can see, because the Bible is very consistent. That in the beginning, He made them male and female. Okay, and that's when the timeline starts. Okay, there was no death and dying, physical, spiritual, emotional, any kind, before the fall of man. There were not T-Rexes killing each other for 65 million to 100 million to 300 million in the Triassic to who knows, up to 3.5 billion years. Death and dying was not
Jesus himself took Adam and Eve very literally. And he didn't believe that they were just a made-up story back then.
No, in fact, and the whole idea of the curse makes no sense. The fall of man, and makes no sense if there was death and dying. And that the problem with the theistic evolution, they get hoisted by their own petard, so to speak. They get into this thing and say, you're saying, well, then my God or your God is either cruel or impotent. And I go, well, He's neither one. He's powerful. He has judged, and the earth was cursed. He hasn't taken His blessing totally off the earth, and it's temporary, but it's fairly short in the scheme of eternity.
Well, you know what a hoist your own petard means.
Yeah, you told me that one time.
A petard is a bomb.
Sidebar, just want to tell you this, okay.
And they would hoist them up to the side of the castle wall in order to blow up the castle wall.
Okay.
But if you're hoisting your own petard, that means you're going to get blown up by your own bomb.
Well, that's kind of what they do. I think the problem with a lot of these things is that we've bought into a lot of worldly theologies, and theistic evolution is one of them, because we're trying to compromise with the world. Do I say you can't be a Christian if you believe that? No, but the fact is, it's really not consistent with the biblical reality, which tells you there was no death, no curse, no physical death before a fall of man and woman, and for Adam and Eve ate the fruit. So I'm going, and it's easier to understand that from that you can actually build a timeline that's credible, and the numbers are all there in the Bible. The short numbers, we don't always know whether they are consecutive or overlapping. Or concurrent. Sometimes that happens. The Judges, we talked about that last time.
Now, David, Solomon, and
Saul, David, and Solomon are fairly straightforward.
Except you had to figure out Saul. Right?
You had to figure out Saul, because the Old Testament does not give any dates, any numbers for him. And that's interesting. You get it in the New Testament, so you got to put that in with the other dates that are given, I believe. Okay, and those other dates add up to 480 years from Moses to the 4th year of King Saul. It's perfect. It's unbelievably good how it works. The kings, the United Monarchy, though, once you figure out that thing, you really start the kings. You got 33 years. Jesus is in Jerusalem. That's the end of the number of the Ark of the Covenant, I believe, because that's the end of that 20 years. So you got to start with David 33 years from that, because he's already reigned 7 years in Hebron. Okay, do you see it? Even though he had a 40-year reign, actually 40 and a half years. And we're getting into that. When we get into it, what happened is Solomon, my brother asked me this today, he goes, how come Solomon started out so good? He turned out to be such a punk. And did he get to heaven? I said, that's God's decision. I think he does, but he really blew it in the end part of his life. Solomon started out the greatest of wisdom, and then he started trusting into his own strength, his own knowledge. It's not wrong to have knowledge. I mean, people say, oh, there's a lot of things back in the old Pentecostal days. Don't go to college. Don't go to school. It's bad. I said, no, but you can't be arrogant and think that that's going to make you a better person than somebody who's not. Let's be real. Paul wrote 3/4 of the New Testament. He was educated. Right. You know what I mean? The other ones wrote a book or two, and their stuff was valuable and thing. But it's God who writes the book. But he uses whatever tool he's got available. He makes some people smarter and sharper than others. But even the dull tools he can use if you got a heart for him. The point of it is that education is neither good nor bad in and of itself, but Solomon started relying on his own knowledge. He got the wisdom from God, but he started relying on his own. He started marrying all the foreign wives and all that stuff, and multiplying horses under himself.
1,000 wives and 700 porcupines.
700 porcupines. The one thing that's interesting is that I found out when we get down to the Babylonian captivity, which is several centuries in the future yet, you realize that ever since Saul was appointed a king, the land had never enjoyed its Sabbath rests. Through all the judges, when God was their king, and that's very, very profound in a typological fashion, because the land is symbolic of the people of God. Out of the cursed earth comes redemption. Jesus was the first fruits of all of us, okay? And he came disguised of sinful flesh. The earth, Adam and Eve, first Adam came out of the earth. And into the dust he went, but the earth itself was cursed, okay? And the land was supposed to lie fallow every 7 years, and it did until Saul was appointed. Then there was 490 years. That's how long the period of time, really, and that's not talked about in the Bible. Right. I made that's an extrapolation. I think it's valid. It holds up when we put all the other numbers together. But there are other long numbers in this part. When we get to the divided kingdom, there's Ezekiel's prophecy of 390 years and 40 years, and there's several things like that. But the kings, you put that together, and it's fairly straightforward in the monarchy. Once we got, like, say, Saul, and then David, and then Solomon, and what you have, and it's consecutive. There's really no overlapping of David's monarchy with Saul. When Saul dies, David takes over and he's reigning in Hebron.
I'll get my cheat sheet here.
Yeah, go ahead and have your cheat sheet.
So right after Solomon dies, you have his son
Rehoboam. Yeah, and what happens is Rehoboam, and the Lord had told Solomon, because of his apostasy or his failure, the nation's going to be stripped from you and your descendants. Okay. And they will not be together like you were, basically. But in your lifetime, I'm not going to do it. Okay? But when you die, it's happening. And I don't know whether Solomon goes, well, okay, I'm gone. I don't care. I mean, I don't know, but you read things into that. But when Rehoboam gets in there, he's this hothead, and he listens to his young advisors, when the northern king says, man, you're taxing us to death. You're being oppressive. And the advisor said, oh, no, these guys are bad. If they tell you this, do it even worse. If Solomon did, and Rehoboam does that. He tells them, well, if my father was oppressive, you'll find me even, 10 times or a lot more. And so what happens is Jeroboam becomes the first king of the northern kingdom. They divide out. And what happens, for those who are not familiar with this, is that Jeroboam is where you get the Samaritans in Samaria. The northern kingdom is based out of Samaria. Okay? And 10 of the tribes defect from Rehoboam. The only ones that stay are what we call Judah and Benjamin. Okay? They're the only two that stay. All the rest of them leave. Okay? And they're out of here. And so now, from this point in time, after Solomon dies, the country is divided into two things. And I will read a little thing here. It's kind of interesting because this happens, I think, when you get into, it says, Dr. John Lightfoot, who's another chronologer, very famous one, okay? And Dr. Martin Anstey, who I've referred to several times, he refers to him and others do as well. He makes some very interesting observations which give a good idea of the difficulties in questions, okay? But Dr. Anstey himself says, speaking of the period of the kings of Israel and Judah, there's not a single difficulty that has been raised which is not capable of a simple and easy solution without doing violence to the text. There's not a single difficulty that has not been satisfactorily cleared up in standard works by able chronologers. The Chronicle of the Events of the Old Testament by Dr. John Lightfoot in the 17th century, Bishop Ussher, Dr. Jones, and things like that. There might be a little bit of a phraseology here, and that's where we have lots of debates on that. But you're talking matters of a year or two, which is important. Don't misunderstand me. That's why the debate is heated. But it's not like billions and millions of years. But he says, in casting up the times of the collateral kingdoms, which we were talking about Judah and Israel. When we talk about Israel now, we're talking about the northern kingdoms. We're talking about Judah, which is where the word Jew comes from. Okay? We're talking about the southern kingdom. It's divided now in Rehoboam and Jeroboam. That's what happens. I know it gets confusing. But he says all you have to do is you lay the kingdoms side by side in two separate columns. That's what I have over here, Doug.
Yeah.
All right? He says your only way is to lay them in two columns, one justly paralleling the other, and run them both by years as the text directs you. But here nicety is needed, not to see how strangely they are reckoned, sometimes inclusive, sometimes otherwise. We'll get into what that means in a second. For this you will easily find, but to find out a reason why they are so reckoned. Rehoboam's years are counted complete, Abijam's are current, whereas it is said that Jeroboam reigned 22 years, and his son Nadab 2 years. You will find that by this reckoning, the Nadab's 2 years fall within the sum of his father's 22. This may seem strange, but the solution is sweet and easy. From 2 Chronicles 13:20, the Lord smote Jeroboam with some ill disease that he could not administer or rule the kingdom, so that he was forced to substitute Nadab in his own lifetime. And in one and the same year, both father and son die. These are the kinds of things that all the way through the kings you're going to find. Of course, the other part of it is, I remember my brother, or no, who was it used to say, how come he named, this talk of Lord of the Rings, we're going to sidebar, he named it Sauron and Saruman. How come Tolkien did that? I says, well, that's the way life is. Names are very similar.
Right, yeah.
We get problems,
And you have that in genealogy.
Genealogy?
Where
It's terrible.
John Smith Sr., John Smith Jr., John Smith III.
In the Old Testament, it didn't always tell you. They didn't do junior, senior. We put like Sennacherib the third, fourth, and they never did that. And what made it even more confusing is sometimes the grandson would brag about the events that his grandfather achieved and put him in his own accomplishments. So there's all that kind of, but the Bible doesn't do that stuff. But the names you're going to find there's when Jehoshaphat, he was a righteous king, but he made common cause with the northern kingdom. That was a bad idea.
No, Rich, I noticed that you have King Asa, and during his reign in Judah, you have a whole list of kings over here in the northern kingdom.
Right, they didn't last long. What's interesting about, this is one thing, you'll bring this out, Judah actually had some good kings. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of them, especially at the end, but they did have a few. Israel had not one good king from beginning to end.
No, they were all rotten
from beginning to end. None of them were good. From Jeroboam on down, they stunk. They were not good. And so They just never know. And God, he would send the prophets like Elijah and Elisha to the northern kingdoms. He had prophetic witness. God cared for them as part of the inheritance of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the tribes of Israel. And but still, they not a one of them. They were just bad from beginning to end. And they basically some were more bad than others.
So you have Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Zimri, Omri, Tibru, and Ahab, all living during the time of Asa. And then when Asa dies, Jehoshaphat, his son reigns in his stead.
And then let's get to Jehoshaphat, okay? Because he read them off, and we'll print this out. You'll see it on the screen, the kings, if you want to compare them. But there are other instances, which is then as commonly has happened since, that a son has ascended the throne during the father's lifetime. They call these co-regencies or co-rex, okay? Rex is just a Latin word for king, okay? Mm-hmm. In such cases, the years of their joint reigns would be reckoned to the reign of each. This is a point for which chronologists have to be continually on the lookout, especially in this period of time, okay? But the knowledge of it enables many difficulties to be cleared up. He continues, Dr. Lightfoot says, there are diverse passages, and such as these, that you will find in the story of the kings. Ahaziah, 2 years older than his father. That would be kind of hard to do. 2 Chronicles 22:2. Baasha fighting 9 years after he was dead. Okay? 2 Chronicles 16:1. Jotham reigning 4 years after he was buried. 2 Kings 15:30. Joram crowned king in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, according to 2 Kings 1:17, with 1 Kings 22 verse 51. And in the 22nd year of Jehoshaphat, so in the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, according to these two passages, in the 22nd year of Jehoshaphat, according to 2 Kings 8:16. And after Jehoshaphat's death, 2 Chronicles 21:1. How do you reckon? They've all been fixed. All of these, it's really, really fascinating, some of the solutions that come in. For the resolution of such ambiguities, the text will do it if it be well searched. This way attained to will guide you in marking these things that seem to be contradictions in the text or slips by the Holy Ghost, in which always is admirable wisdom. Let's see.
Get an example.
All right, let's go. Okay, let's go. First of all, Dr. Andy, this will help you out. Dr. Anstey refers to an article by Dr. Willis J. Beecher on the kings of Israel and Judah in the American Presbyterian, April, this is 1880. The key to the solution of all these difficulties. And so there are some rules you have to listen to. Rule number one, all the years mentioned are current years of a consecutive system. The first year of a king is not a year's time beginning with the day and month of his ascension, but a year's time beginning with the preceding or the following New Year's Day. Okay? I.e., the new moon before the Passover. So it's not our New Year's. The Passover is like in April, March, April. Rule 2, when a reign closes and another begins during a year, that year is counted to the previous reign. That's the way Judah did it, the southern kingdom. Rule number 3, regularly in the case of the earlier kings of Israel, and occasionally in other cases, the broken year is counted to the following reign as well as to the previous reign. That's the way the northern kingdom did it. So in other words, if a king dies in the middle of the year, you're going to count a year onto the previous king and a year onto this king, so you get 2 years there. Well, you don't have 2 years. Okay, that's rule number 3. Okay, concerning the history of the period of the divided kingdom, the Hebrew text of the history of the period is self-consistent and self-contained. All the data required for the resolution of any difficulties that may arise are to be found in the text itself. There's no need to fall back upon Josephus. Still less is there any need to introduce any of the harmonizing expedients of the Septuagint or any of the emendations, restorations, etc., by modern critics. Okay? So, we're not going to go into Sothic cycles, but we'll go into this chronology. How much time? We're getting down here. We got 4 or 5 minutes trying to get me a good example here. Specific one. Let's go to the one here. Let's do the first one. Let's do Baasha's invasion of Judah.
Okay.
All right. This is a good one. All right. In 2 Chronicles 16, verses 1 through 3, it is stated that in the 6th and 30th year of the reign of Asa, Baasha, king of Israel, came up against Judah. But the 36th year of Asa would be 9 years after the death of Baasha. Okay? This being what Lightfoot referred to in speaking of Baasha fighting 9 years after he was dead. The Hebrew text, however, says not that it was the 36th year of the reign of Asa, as in our authorized version, but that it was the 36th year of the kingdom of Asa. That's the north, okay? So it is evident that the reckoning here is from the beginning of the separate kingdom of Judah. Hence, the invasion of Judah by Baasha would be in the 16th year of Asa, and the 13th of his own reign is tabulated above. It's talking about when the kingdom was divided, because you're back at the very beginning. And that exactly fits it perfectly, okay? Again, there is an apparent disagreement or contradiction in regard to the beginning of the reign of Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. According to 1 Kings 22:41 and verse 50, Jehoshaphat reigned 25 years and was succeeded by Jehoram, or Joram. This would make the beginning of the latter's reign in the year 32:28, but according to 2 Kings 1:17, Jehoram of Judah had already been reigning 1 year when Jehoram of Israel. See now, you see what the complications? You had a Jehoram of Judah and a Jehoram of Israel.
Okay.
Same name exactly. Okay, and that gets confusing too. All right, that's why you got to line them up in columns. Okay, when Jehoram of Israel succeeded his father Ahab, which was in the year 32:21, again in 2 Kings 3:1. It is stated that Jehoram, the son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. Thus, Jehoram of Israel began to reign in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, and in the 2nd year of Jehoram, his son. Evidently, then, Jehoram was at that time reigning in the place of his father Jehoshaphat. And this is where it gets complicated. Jehoshaphat got sick, got better, and then he dies, okay? I mean, so they were reigning, he was reigning in place of his father. So that's kind of not a co-rex, that's like a pre-rex. He's reigning before he's actually king. His father's still technically king. Then he's reigning alongside his father. Then his father dies and he reigns solely. That explains a lot of these things.
Grover Cleveland's presidency being 2 non-consecutive terms.
Well, and in this case, they pretty much were concurrent. The time of Jehoram was all concurrent, but it's just that it's not all. One time they're talking about when he's co-reigning, when they're talking he's reigning in his stead, and then when he's talking about when he's reigning his father's dead. And that solves an incredible amount of difficulties, okay? And we got about a minute left, don't we?
Yeah, about just
all right, I'll try to get this quick, and I'll try not to stumble over my words. We'll try this, okay? So evidently that Jehoram was at that time reigning in the place of his father, Jehoshaphat, either because of some disability or for other reason not stated. Such incidents have often occurred in the margin of the Cambridge Bible, which explains the matter. The 2nd year that Jehoram was pro-rex, so he's reigning in place of his father, who's still the legal king, and that's the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, chapter 3:1. Again, 2 Kings 8:6, we find the following record, and in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat being the then king of Judah, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. Here's a plain statement that Jehoram reigned at the same time with his father, Jehoshaphat. Accordingly, the name appears in the table as co-rex. The words began to reign should be simply reigned. See margin of the Cambridge Bible. In fact, Jehoram began to reign, as we have seen 5 years previously. Okay? So finally, Jehoram's reign as sole king began at the death of his father, after the latter had reigned 25 years. Thus, the seeming contradictions after the 3 several beginnings of Jehoram's reign is clearly explained, and those who wish a more complete and detailed can read. We can read in Anstey or even more in this book. So it's really it's a fascinating thing. But chronologists who are really into this stuff, it's so much fun. But you realize we're going into quote contradictions that the average slug will never get. Right. Whenever they say the Bible contradicts itself, I'm going to give you every contradiction you can think of, and I'm going to show you the explanations. Okay? Now, what I will do, this caveat, I'm not saying my explanation is the explanation, but I'm saying if you have a reasonable premise without stretching the text beyond reason, okay, just straightforward, then let's be reasonable. Most people who want to find contradictions are not reasonable, okay? The Bible is eminently and ultimately reasonable. So that's it for today. I think we're probably out of time, aren't we, Doug?
Yes. We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.